They did not grant him a swift death. Instead, they boiled him alive inch by inch in a cauldron of searing oil, while an entire city looked on. This was the fate of Marcus Atilius Regulus, one of Rome's most admired generals, once celebrated for courage and honor. Those very traits pushed him into a death so brutal it became legend. His torment at the hands of his enemies remains one of the most infamous executions of the ancient world. As we unravel his story, you'll see how a Roman hero's devotion to honor dragged him into an agony beyond imagination. A single choice made for the sake of principle hurled him into a nightmare of torture that echoed for centuries. To understand how Regulus ended this way, we must return to the mid-3rd century BC, during the First Punic War. Rome and Carthage were locked in a merciless struggle for control of the Mediterranean. Carthage, a wealthy naval empire in North Africa, and Rome, a rising republic in Italy, had already battered each other for years in a savage conflict. In 256 BC, Consul Marcus Atilius Regulus carried the fight to Carthage itself. Leading a Roman invasion across the sea, he struck directly at the enemy's homeland. At first, fortune was on his side. His legions stormed across Carthaginian soil and pushed so close they could see the city walls of Carthage itself. The Romans believed victory was inevitable. Riding high on his triumphs, Regulus offered Carthage humiliating peace terms, demanding nothing less than unconditional surrender. The terms were so outrageous they shocked the Carthaginians, igniting their fury. Rather than bow, Carthage vowed revenge, swearing Rome would pay dearly for its arrogance. The tide soon shifted. Carthage recruited a Spartan mercenary commander, Xanthippus, whose military genius transformed their army. In 255 BC, at the Battle of Tunis, Regulus's army was annihilated. Thousands of Roman soldiers were slaughtered, their invincible general watching helplessly as his men were cut down. Regulus himself was captured alive. Once a conqueror, now a chained prisoner, he was paraded as living proof of Carthage's victory. The great Roman commander was cast into a dungeon, left to rot while the war raged on. In Rome, many assumed he had perished. He was mourned as a fallen hero, yet in Carthage he remained alive, too valuable to kill, a bargaining chip for the future. By 250 BC, with the war draining both sides, Carthage turned to Regulus as a tool for peace. They offered him a deal. He would be released to negotiate with Rome, but only if he swore a sacred oath to return once his mission was finished. For Regulus, it was an unexpected taste of freedom, though one bound by a promise. When he stepped onto Roman soil again, he was hailed like a man returned from the grave. The Senate gathered, expecting him to urge acceptance of Carthage's offer. The Carthaginians no doubt imagined he would plead for mercy, desperate to save himself and the other Roman captives. But Regulus shocked everyone. Standing before the Senate, he urged Rome to reject Carthage's terms outright. He declared that Rome must continue the war, that surrender would disgrace the Republic and waste the lives already lost. His words stunned the chamber. He had effectively condemned himself and the other prisoners to die for the sake of victory. You won't believe what he said next. Regulus openly told them that Carthage was weak, untrustworthy, and that Rome must crush them completely. His family and fellow senators were horrified. According to later accounts, his wife and children begged him to stay, tears streaming as they clung to him, pleading that he not return. At last he was home, free, alive. He needed only to break his oath to live in peace. But Marcus Atilius Regulus was unyielding. Bound by honor, he gently pulled away from their embrace and declared he must return to Carthage. Despite desperate protests, he boarded a ship, fully aware he was sailing back into the hands of his executioners. When he stood again before the Carthaginians and delivered Rome's defiance, their fury exploded. They had trusted him to plead for peace, but instead he had mocked their mercy. A quick death, they decided, was far too merciful. Regulus would pay for his defiance with torment almost beyond belief. Determined to make an example of him, Carthage sentenced the Roman general to suffer as few men ever had. His punishment would be remembered for centuries as a warning of what it meant to cross their empire. The torment began deep inside a Carthaginian dungeon. Determined to shatter the Roman spirit, Regulus's captors began with sleep deprivation. Day and night, whenever exhaustion forced his eyes shut, guards stabbed him with spears or shook him awake. Hour after hour, they denied him rest until simply staying alive became unbearable. Delirium crept in, dreams and reality twisting together. The disciplined commander was reduced to a trembling wreck, ravaged by endless wakefulness. And this was only the start of his nightmare. After days of torment, the Carthaginians dragged the weakened Regulus from his cell into the scorching midday sun. He had not seen daylight in weeks, and the sudden brightness must have felt like knives gouging into his eyes. Blinded, squinting, and chained, he faced his captors, and a crowd eager to watch. Then came an act so grotesque it still chills the imagination. A torturer stepped forward, knife glinting in the light. With pitiless precision, he sliced away Regulus's eyelids. In one horrifying moment, the thin folds of skin that shield the eyes were gone. Blood streaked his face as he realized the horror. He could never close his eyes again. Exposed to the merciless sun, Regulus was forced to stare unblinking as the blazing light scorched his raw, unprotected eyes. The agony was indescribable. His eyes dried, cracked, and burned as though fire was boring straight into his skull. Witnesses claimed Regulus finally screamed, a primal sound ripped from his very soul. The once unshakable general writhed helplessly, his captors watching coldly, satisfied by his torment. Yet even this was not enough. The Carthaginians had devised an even crueler confinement. They forced Regulus into a wooden cage scarcely larger than his own body. Its walls bristled with iron spikes. Once sealed inside, he could not sit, kneel, or lie down. At first, he remained rigid, straining to avoid the spikes, but exhaustion soon crushed his strength. His legs buckled, driving the nails deep into his flesh. Any movement only impaled him on the opposite side. It was a trap of pure sadism. Stand and his muscles would cramp until collapse. Sag and the spikes would tear his body apart. They left him trapped in this box of pain for what must have felt like eternity. From time to time, guards would shake the cage, scraping the nails against his raw wounds and forcing new cries of agony. Blood seeped from countless punctures until the once mighty general looked like a human pincushion. Imagine his terror, bleeding, blinded, sleepless, locked between torture and death. And still his torment was not over. The Carthaginians had saved one final horror, one that would sear itself into history. In the central square of Carthage, they prepared his ultimate punishment. A massive iron cauldron was dragged out and filled with oil. Beneath it, a roaring fire blazed to life. Word spread quickly through the city. Something monstrous was about to unfold. A crowd gathered, some thirsting for revenge, others whispering in shock, wondering if their leaders would truly go this far. As flames licked the cauldron, the oil began to bubble and spit, filling the air with a choking stench. Anticipation rippled through the spectators. The hated Roman general was about to meet his end. At last, the cage opened. Regulus was dragged into the daylight. The sight was ghastly. His body bruised and punctured, his eyes ruined, his skin caked in sweat and blood. The man who once stood proud in armor could now barely stand at all. Yet even in this broken state, Regulus refused to beg for mercy. Half-conscious, groaning, he could still feel the waves of heat radiating from the cauldron, hear the hungry crackle of fire. Chains rattled as executioners hauled him onto the platform. The crowd hushed. Some leaned forward in vengeful glee, while others could hardly bring themselves to watch. Then came the moment of horror. With a signal, the executioners began lowering Marcus Atilius Regulus into the boiling oil. The instant his feet touched the bubbling liquid, a terrible hiss cut the air. His flesh began to blister and char. An ear-splitting scream tore from his throat. The first and only full scream of agony from a man who had endured so much in silence. The crowd gasped, shaken by the raw force of his suffering. Stone-faced, the executioners continued their grim task, lowering him slowly into the cauldron of boiling oil. Inch by inch, the bubbling liquid crept upward, spitting as pieces of flesh broke away. Regulus' cries warped into a raw, inhuman wail. His nerves were aflame, every fiber of his body shrieking. From the front rows, some spectators watched with savage satisfaction. Revenge finally achieved. But others turned pale, horrified by the sight and stench. Some covered their faces, unable to endure it, while a few retched at the nauseating smell of burning flesh that now filled the square. When the oil reached his chest, Regulus's voice faltered, breaking under the strain. His body convulsed against the chains as his skin blistered and split. The crackle of cooking flesh and the hiss of oil drowned out his weakening cries. The once iron-willed Roman's face twisted in pain beyond imagination. As his lower body cooked to the bone, the oil rose to his neck. Regulus's head snapped back in a final spasm. Moments later, mercifully, his screams ceased. Finally, the executioners let his head sink beneath the bubbling surface. In those last ghastly moments, the burning oil would have surged into his mouth and lungs, drowning him in liquid fire. His blackened corpse was pulled from the pot and held aloft, dripping hot oil, barely recognizable as human. For a moment, silence gripped the square. Even Carthage's own citizens seemed stunned by the horror of what they had done. Some whispered in grim satisfaction, but many trembled, knowing they had witnessed something monstrous. When news of Regulus's fate reached Rome, horror and outrage swept the Republic. He was hailed as a martyr of Roman honor. Mothers wept. Fathers told their sons of his sacrifice. His wife Marcia was said to be consumed by grief and fury. According to later Roman accounts, she took brutal revenge. 2 high-ranking Carthaginian prisoners held in Rome were handed over to her, and she mirrored on them some of the very torments inflicted on her husband. Eyelids ripped away, torture unto death. The act shocked even some Romans. Yet to many it was seen as just retribution. Carthage's cruelty had been intended as a warning to Rome. Instead, it backfired. Regulus' suffering became a rallying cry. Roman soldiers went into battle swearing vengeance, his name on their lips. Far from breaking their resolve, Carthage had steeled it. The war raged on, and Rome ultimately triumphed. In the decades that followed, Regulus's story was retold to generations of Roman children as both a warning and an inspiration, a symbol of integrity in the face of unthinkable torment, and a reminder of the depths of cruelty humans can inflict. His name became legend, a man who honored his word even when it meant walking into a boiling cauldron, and that leaves haunting questions behind. What would you have done in Regulus's place? If keeping your word meant facing torture beyond imagination, would you have the courage to go back? Or would you break your oath to save yourself?